Hi, I'm Chris Carmody. I'm the director of NCCBA, the North Carolina Clean Energy Business Alliance. Speaking on behalf of Group 9, the distributed and renewable energy providers and advocates. We had a great group of diverse energy interests. And our goals were basically to support this process that the governor has put into place and make sure that renewables aren't an afterthought in planning. This form probably guarantees that, but not all processes, I think, carry that guarantee. Our motivating factors, to some degree, looks like some other people's vision statements, I think. But obviously, we're concerned about carbon, a variety of energy sources, political leadership, resiliency came up a lot, and sustainability. But then also having the capacity to really understand these decisions. So having the institutions that are making decisions on policy or regulatory fronts really having the information they need. Our vision was a little narrower than some of the visions put out. It was more specifically about reform in this process and a little bit less, I think, about a general vision of the future. Incentives were sort of the big issue, the issue that we saw as a lever to really change things. In terms of successes of the current system, basically it's ubiquitous. It covers geography all over the state. We're a leader, I think, thanks to policymakers in particular, who put in place Senate Bill 6 some years ago and have done a number of things since then to support renewable or cleaner energy. We could talk about what those things mean later, but some people have already talked about that. So breadth, ubiquity, the public generally doesn't have to worry that much about whether the power is on, although disasters are a little different. But resilience seems to be a bigger and bigger question mark. The challenges of the current system really we broke down into three areas. One is that there is a very tough, entrenched system that resists the growth of renewables, even though renewables now are lowest cost energy. And so, there's conversation about pollution and carbon generation and what's green or not, but there's another intersection that we talked about a lot, which is what is the lowest cost energy. And so when you combine those things, we think that sort of points to something that is advantageous to the ratepayers generally and to residents in terms of our carbon future. There's a lack of transparency for consumers, both for big business consumers and employers as well as residents, and that's been discussed a lot. And then the energy planning and utility investment decision-making process is really outdated and it lacks accountability. So right now when an IRP is submitted by a utility, it really has no teeth. And there's not public or stakeholder input in that up front. It's sort of like a plan that then, gets shelved until next year and a new one comes out, but it doesn't really have a bearing on how investment is made. We didn't have a lot of areas of disagreement. I think we had a couple of key themes. One is that really, I think we tend to think that incentives are the lever by which all other things can be moved. And obviously businesses have competing interests. And if a utility has financial incentives that push it in one direction, they have to move that way because they have shareholder interest. So it's not necessarily about an ideological discussion or whether people are bad or good. It's whether public policy and regulation push entities economically to do something. And we think that this is really key. And right now, the incentive system for utilities in North Carolina is to get them to spend a lot more money than is ideal and not to spend on lowest cost alternatives. If that were changed, as it has started to change in some other states, then we might have different outcomes. I think the other thing that we've talked about is in terms of looking at different systems, where we wind up on that spectrum. So some states have moved toward performance-based systems, which still sort of requires a lot of oversight, both from legislators and from regulators. Some states and clusters of states, like Virginia next door and PJM, have marketplaces, and so they've made decisions about where there's a natural monopoly, for instance, in the transmission of power, and where there really is a marketplace where private sector providers take the risks and go head to head in providing sort of the best and the lowest cost energy out there. And so that's, and there are a lot of models for this all around us. And so we think that's an interesting thing to discuss. We also think, at least the way the market is organized now, that the market actually would be pretty consistent with lowering carbon emissions. So that's what we've got.
Our next group is going to be the business working group.
Thank you. So my name is John Thigpen. I'm with Jones Lang LaSalle, representing the business communities group here. This is the other participants with this group. I'll throw out that same disclosure as the other groups have shared. These are our views, not those of our companies. And in terms of the content of these slides, I think what you'll see is there's a lot of repetition. What I hope to convey here is that, an important distinction is that in addition to the other environmental and social benefits that could come from a clean energy plan, there are a lot of business benefits that could be realized as well, which is that third piece of the triple bottom line. So these business benefits, they could also yield benefits for the state as well. Increased tax revenue, improved ability to attract new businesses are a couple that come to mind. First question we had was, what are the group's 4 priority goals for participating in the clean energy plan process? So the first one's the capacity and access to affordable renewable energy. I won't go into much here on that one. Affordable is a word that probably should have been written in bold and underlined. That's obviously very important to us. It's a major part of our operating expenses. I'll go into a little more detail on the next one, which is building efficiency requirements. So, not all businesses have the freedom to make building design choices. These are often done by the landlord. This can lead to some misaligned incentives. So, the occupant's paying for some upgrades, but the landlord's paying the bills, and so the occupant doesn't get the benefits. Or the landlord may want to keep rates artificially low and has not incentivized to spend the extra money to make a more efficient building. We believe code enhancements could be a more inclusive approach for businesses, without the flexibility within their leases to pursue clean energy and energy efficiency alternatives. There's an occupant employee wellness and productivity piece as well. So there's lots of studies about how improved indoor air quality can lead to reduced sick days and improved productivity for employees, and so that's obviously something that we care a lot about. I'll move on from there. The size of the skilled workforce is another priority for us. There's a shortage of a skilled workforce, particularly in the trades, not only in North Carolina but elsewhere. So we not only need the people to design and build and operate and maintain these clean energy systems, we need the expertise to help our businesses get the most out of a clean energy plan and help our businesses operate more efficiently and reduce those operating expenses. And investing in that workforce has benefits for the state as well, because we keep those jobs in the state instead of having to resource them from elsewhere. And then the last one's the number and the use of electric vehicles and charging networks. That one's been touched on, I think, a few times, so I'll just move on to the next slide here. Okay, so these are our motivating factors. So being proactive and being a good corporate citizen is one. So the first sub-bullet there is talking about risk mitigation. there's a lot of trends in the business community, and particularly in the investment community, about understanding what the environmental, social, and government risks and opportunities are to businesses. And depending on how a business performs within those three areas, it can impact profitability, it can impact cost of capital, and those are important things that we need to manage in order to help our businesses continue to thrive. And Clean Energy Plan can help enable us to take advantage of those opportunities that are presented by transitioning to a low carbon economy. Can also help us mitigate those risks that come with climate change. In addition to that, there's plenty of studies that show how kind of the new entrants to the workforce have a stronger desire to work for companies that do well by doing good. And so for us to attract and retain that top talent, a Clean Energy Plan can help us do that because it gives us the opportunities to take advantage of renewable energy and other sustainability opportunities that might not be created otherwise. Third-party sales of electricity, we've talked about that one a lot as well. From the business perspective, the power purchase agreement is a pretty powerful vehicle for us because it gives us some budget certainty in terms of our electricity prices that we pay. So, in the deals that I've been associated with, these are very long-term deals, 15 to 20 years sometimes. And so having that price certainty on what we're paying per kilowatt hour for at least a portion of our load helps us better understand long-term what our costs are going to be in that very important bucket of operating expenses. And also gives us the freedom to use the limited capital that we have for more growth oriented initiatives, which are good for our business, obviously, good for the state as well. Let's see, I'll move to the next one. And again, this is an important one. I want to make sure we emphasize this. This labor market shortage, particularly for the skilled trades. I've mentioned this in the previous slides, but one part that I didn't really cover is the attention to the K through 12 and higher education organizations, institutions in the state. Sometimes the trades kind of get a bad rap in terms of, kind of the sexiness of those types of jobs. So we want to kind of pay close attention to rebranding some of those careers and talk about how those types of jobs really contribute to a clean energy economy and a healthier planet. And then the last piece here is more inclusivity of the small and medium-sized businesses. So we want more participation there. It seems like historically a lot of the clean energy efforts from the business community in our state have been some of the bigger players. And for an example that comes to mind is community solar. Those types of contract vehicles have a lot less hair on them, right? So it kind of removes some of the restrictive elements that would otherwise prohibit some smaller mid-sized businesses from participating in a traditional PPA arrangement. Vision of a clean energy future. So we didn't write a vision statement per se. We just have some elements that we'll talk about. I won't go into these in a tremendous amount of detail, but I'll take a deep dive on a couple of them. So proactive policies and actions. So the way we approached this was, we believe that there are some business benefits to being early to market or first to market. And, kind of similar to that, we think that there are some benefits of having proactive strategies that can kind of sustain a clean energy economy in our state going forward. And so that's kind of why we have the emphasis on the proactive piece there. We want to retain the benefits of a clean energy plan. The equitable access is one we've covered a lot. I'll keep moving. Inclusive of all North Carolina businesses, I've touched on that as well. The catalyst for innovation, new business, and continued economic development. Is yet another one. Strengthen our resiliency to natural threats and preserve opportunities for future generations, and execute it in a bipartisan way. So I think, those elements are pretty consistent with what we've heard a lot today, so I'll keep moving. The systems the three features that we feel are challenges within the existing system. So the lack of third-party sales, I talked on that a little bit. Won't go into more detail there. The interconnection approval process and rates that the utilities are willing to pay for qualified systems. So, we think with respect to that, there's some language that opens some doors for us to pursue clean energy within our businesses, but the implementation of those opportunities is somewhat of a struggle, and we think that that could be improved. And the political will piece, I think, goes without saying. And here's our last slide. Things that we think are working well and want to maintain is, the reliability, safety, and affordability. That's very important for us in the business community. The renewable energy portfolio standards, I think everyone's listed that one so far. And then the continued investment in smart grid, smart metering technologies, particularly visibility in that incremental usage data can help us really kind of fine tune our operational efficiencies and drive our operating costs down, improve our profitability. So I believe that's all for us.
Excellent. And our final stakeholder presentation of the day will be the Higher Education Working Group.
Thank you. All right. Bad to leave academics for last, probably. All right. So I know that we focus this heavily towards the higher education sector. I know that several of my colleagues are here today who helped to work on this. So I will look to them at certain points throughout this, I think. So I know Walt Robinson, who was here last time, could not be here today. I don't know, is Eric here? Okay, now I know what Eric looks like. I've only heard his voice, so that's good. And I know that Jamie and Jen are both here, so they were instrumental in helping to put this together. Our process was a little bit different, I think, perhaps than some others. I think one of the big things that we tried to do was to reach out across the state to different public universities, the community colleges, and through the private universities as well, and largely using the Appalachian State Energy Summit's contact list. We contacted over about 250 different folks, not just on the faculty side, but across the faculty, facility management, sustainability directors. And so we sent a survey out to them, and the surveys the responses fell in different categories based on whether you were on the education research side or the facilities management side. So we'll see some of both of those sorts of answers. Got about 45 responses to that, so a fair response rate. And so a lot of what we did here was to try to represent what our colleagues throughout higher education seemed to be feeling based on the responses that we received. Okay. So what we did initially was we came up with a set of priority goals that we asked the respondents to to respond to what their thoughts were, and we basically kind of grouped them in three areas where we see higher education has a role. The first of which is on the facilities management side, right? Obviously, we're large owners and operators of real estate, and so the question here is, can the universities look at their own operations as sort of best practices and try to go beyond the Executive Order 80 goals? So that's one element there. The research side, because research and education are the other two elements, obviously, for the university. But how do we utilize our faculty, staff, and student resources to push further in clean energy? All right, and how do we become essentially models of sustainability research and sustainability-related research here in North Carolina? And then education. So very similar to the research piece, how do we become leaders in sustainability-related education? Because we think that kind of leadership is also important for the state as we look at developing the economy of the state. Some of the motivating factors. So the next couple of slides, what we did is we tried to gather the responses that we received from our surveys, and what we tried to do is to summarize a little bit of I guess where the highlights were. So when we asked folks what their motivating factors were, here's a couple of things that we received. Big piece here is that we're educating the leaders of our future. So we need to inspire them so that they're both informed and committed to carbon neutrality and global warming, right? So the role of education and the role that we play in sort of disseminating the message, I guess, if you will. One that maybe kind of piles on to the last presentation that we had there, talking about workforce. So here, the absolute lack of, I don't know if it's absolute, that's maybe a little bit strong, but a lack of skilled tradespeople needed to build sort of the advanced and future energy systems. And so looking at making North Carolina a leader in vocational education around energy. And then one that came out, I think, throughout is the children's future as one of the motivating factors. Now, this was Jen's idea. I like this. This was so to try to get the vision. The way we tried to do this, Jen's idea was the idea of the tweet from the future. What would you receive? We got some interesting ones, including some people who said that they still looked good in 2025. So some of the things that we see, I think, are around, technology and how much easier it is to get technologies utilized, I guess, within the university. This is a big one that I think we saw a lot of. Students seeking out the UNC system, institutions, and so students coming to us because of what we have within the UNC system. And then employers recognizing that our graduates have the skill sets and the leadership that they're looking to have in their future workforce. And then I think another one that kind of comes up here is the ability to actually buy clean power and to be able to potentially do it in your own facilities, right? So again, you see a couple of different things. People talking from the facilities management side here as well as from the educational side. And then, so net positive buildings, people wanting to see that at some point in the future. So there's a lot of interesting things here, and for those who'd like to see more of them, there's some good ones that are there, but these were some of the highlights that we chose from what we received. Now, in terms of the top 3 challenges and opportunities, so a couple of things that we went through here. What we did was we allowed folks to be able to identify what they saw as top challenges and top opportunities, and we decided to break it up both at state level and university level. So what are the impediments to your university, and what are the impediments statewide? And so Eric did a great job of trying to summarize all these from the responses that we got. So you can see here from the state level, the first cost of renewables is a challenge. That came up quite a bit on the responses that we received. The DEP monopoly of electrical production and distribution came up quite a bit. And then the reliance on natural gas comes up as challenges. At the university level, our reliance on our carbon fuel infrastructure, both for our transportation as well as for powering and heating our buildings. The lack of strategy and leadership at the university level. And I think that's something that's probably different based on universities, depending on which institution you're looking at. It's a little bit different. And then the lack of funding dedicated to renewable energy. Okay. In terms of opportunities, in terms of things that we see as good things that we have right now, obviously, as I think a lot of us have said, reliable energy, transmission and distribution, use of net and smart metering, both of those 2 technologies that we have the ability to do that, and strong Public Utility Commission oversight. At the university level, so interestingly enough, like I said earlier, I said some folks saw no strategy and leadership as a problem. Others saw it as a positive. So there's definitely some different things kind of going on. One thing that I know some of the universities are doing is district energy and cogeneration is an opportunity that a lot of universities have at our university. That's not something that we do. We should do it probably, but we don't. And energy research and the fact that we have so much of that we can leverage and potentially use our own facilities to be living laboratories for that type of thing. In terms of areas of consensus and non-consensus, there were a couple of things that kind of came out here, and we asked folks to respond to some of these things. One element, and it was, I think, Eric that had raised this, although I'm aware of this issue as well, state requiring that new building O&M costs are calculated only out 10 years, which is short. And allows us, or prevents us, I guess, if you will, from being able to make better investment decisions when it comes to building design. And we see the benefits of that. I know at UNC Charlotte, where we built a lot of new buildings that are LEED buildings and are not particularly well-performing buildings once you really get down to the brass tacks of it. Commonly available. So this is actually a big one that I think about a lot as well, which is the fact that if we're looking at more renewables, we need flexible options, and that usually means that for flexibility, you're looking at combined cycle gas turbines, right? And so having more solar by and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting rid of that dependence on natural gas, and that's an important thing to think about. The other element, I guess, here, utilities oversight, regulation, and incentives for renewables. So the incentives have been positive, but will need to continue to be positive as we move forward. So some areas of non-consensus. So I threw in a few things that we saw in the presentation. I guess the only one I put in here was greater consideration of nuclear power. So I threw in a couple of the outliers that we saw. So one of them was nuclear. We didn't see that from many folks, but I think that's an important thing to think about. The other element, which I don't think I've heard talked about in this group, which came out from one or two outliers, was around carbon taxes as one potential way to be able to look at pushing things forward. Now, as educators and researchers, I think a lot of our natural thoughts went to what could we do to contribute around some of the conversations that we've been having in this process. So we had a lot of conversation in one of our calls about this, and this was really Jamie's idea. And DASH or DASH-E, I don't know what we.
If you have an acronym, it always sounds better.
That's right. Basically, what we looked at was the concept around how we could utilize our platform, if you will, as educators, as researchers, to be able to provide a bit of a public benefit to our students as well as to the general public on trying to educate folks around the challenges associated with the transition to a clean energy economy. Because there's no free lunch, right? So how do we think through these things? So the concept here is really, again, trying to be able to bridge this gap between the vision of a sustainable future and where we are today. So essentially what we were thinking about is some kind of a tool, whether it's a sort of a gamification idea is really what this is kind of based upon, or some kind of a website or some methodology for both our students as well as the community at large to be able to understand, okay, well, if I want to achieve 100% renewable, what does that mean in terms of cost, reliability, et cetera, et cetera? And there's some precedent for some of this. I'm not as familiar with the block by block, but the UT Austin LCOE calculator, I'm familiar with that. The general concept, I think, as educators, I think we looked at our role to be able to potentially bridge that gap for the community at large, and that was something that we spent, I don't know, a fair bit of time in one of our conversations about, and I think it's a pretty intriguing idea. So with that, I think that's all that we have. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much to our three speakers. And now we have a bit of time for questions.
Daniel Brooks with NCSEA again. The higher education was top of mind, I think. Did you all discuss universities, colleges' roles and responsibilities in terms of community level clean energy goals? I'm thinking, I'm sure Appalachia State has a lot to do with Boone's clean energy goals. We saw a tragic example here in the Triangle recently where Duke University, unfortunately, dealt a fatal blow to a decades-long light rail project. How do we avoid those situations in the future where universities can be better partners in supporting localized clean energy or carbon goals?
Yeah, we didn't really touch too much on that concept. I don't know if I want to. You guys have any thought? Around those things, I don't think we really have much conversation. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts out there.
We did talk about being leaders in the community by what we are doing. We did not talk specifically about Duke University or any other universities.
I think there's a perception that you're only planning for within the walls of the university.
No, well, I mean,
situations that help alleviate that
But
perception.
yeah, I mean, we definitely didn't do that. I mean, so we did, like, for instance, even the last piece that I talked about there, sort of this idea of gamification. I mean, I think a lot of what we did talk about was how do we utilize our platform for outreach and to educate the community at large, not just our students. That I think we view that as a really big thing. I don't think we talked as much about the community, powering the community per se, or those kinds of things. But I think the role of education for the community, I think that's something that I think we see as important for sure. I don't know if others have any thoughts on that.
Thank you, Jamie Russell, Appalachian State. So I think several universities have outreach mechanisms in place. I will point to obvious three with the energy centers. So you have Steve from North Carolina State, and we have Greg from North Carolina A&T, and then I represent the Appalachian Energy Center. And so these are sort of natural outreach agencies with an outward-looking goal. I think I can't speak for other universities, but certainly Appalachian does have a lot of training available in small wind and micro hydro and things like that. But I do think, especially through the energy centers and through some other aspects. I mean, North Carolina State has the agricultural extension, which is outreaching to farmers. So I think there is a natural. We do tend to get stuck inside our ivory tower sometime, and but I don't think it's. I think it's more the exception than the rule. But.
Excellent. Question over there.
Tim Perfeather from Nicholas Institute at Duke University. I do actually not want to talk about the light rail debacle. It is a debacle, and I'm happy to talk offline with people. I'm no longer involved with the sustainability committee, so I'm glad not to be in the middle of this. But as a former chair of the sustainability committee, I wanted to actually talk to a couple things. One is I think the universities should be looking to places where they can invest in the community and trying to, like, if we're going to do things, we should be doing things that can be scalable across the community. The one, and I did, wearing this hat, promised our director of biogas strategy at Duke that I would bring up biogas as a topic that hasn't really been dealt with in this stakeholder meeting, but I think probably deserves some conversation. In the plan, there's a major investment on biogas going on right now across the state. You know, most of the Smithfield Dominion $250 million partnership to develop their resources, but beyond swine and all of its controversies, we're the second largest biogas source state in the country right now by potential, and particularly if you're looking at thermal energy and not just electricity, it's a pretty significant area. So what's one place the university's really tried to lead and try and stimulate the biogas market in the state because of the benefits we think it brings here, and then also that it scales to other jurisdictions, particularly developing world countries where they have a lot of biomass power potential as well. So I promised I would raise biogas as an issue, and we will submit, I think, written comments since Tanya can't be here today, trying to raise that issue as well.
Excellent. Do we have any questions from the DEQ staff?
Afraid you're going to say that, so I actually have 3 questions. Okay, to Chris. This is a question related to, in the last couple of years, so many things have been tried, and I think we're here talking about it again. So my question is, what more or how differently can we propose recommendations to the governor that haven't been tried? And give us an idea that has some level of success in terms of, support and likelihood of things moving forward rather than backwards.
That's a $1 million question, but I have a couple of thoughts on it just from observation. I think one of the key things is obviously the utilities have to get something out of it. So there's a lot of different frustrations with the monopoly system. Some of those are fair, some of them might be less fair. But at the end of the day, there's still huge entities that do control the grid one way or another, and they have not only shareholders but all sorts of other stakeholders. So at the end of the day, it can't, whatever the change is, can't be done in exclusion to them. I think the challenge, though, is finding solutions that their internal leadership is comfortable with, because change is a really hard thing. And, utilities are kind of like bonds, right? I mean, they're a guaranteed rate of return, and we're used to that model that goes back to the 1940s. But now we're in the 21st century. So I think the utilities need to get something substantive that makes them successful in whatever they're doing. I think a second thing that goes along with that is that there has to be transparency. And, we've heard about it over and over in this discussion. It's a kind of a mystery to me, if you're a monopoly, why you have trade secrets that other utilities in deregulated markets with competition don't have. So I think that's a consideration. So those are a couple of things. I think the other thing is just to recognize that there's been a lot of concern about equity and about whether people at the lower end of the income spectrum are going to pay for the devolution of what is essentially a public system, right? And we see this over and over again. We see it in public schools and lots of things where significant purchasers disinvest and they vote with their feet. And that is what we're about to see in North Carolina. We're about to see the biggest consumers of energy walk away from the utility, just as they did in places like Nevada, where Google or the casinos or you name it say, this isn't working for us, it's costing us tens of millions of dollars. We're gonna cash out our chips and walk away, even if that costs us $90 million up front, which is what they paid in Nevada. And that, I think, is a bad scenario for everyone. It's not good for Duke. It's not good for ratepayers. But ultimately, those companies, those employers have a decision. They can come here. They can go to Texas, where there is the kind of market they want. They can go to Virginia, where there's the kind of market they want. So Duke has a critical role to play in economic development, and it's not, again, the old school role. It's a role in being responsive to customers. And I think if the largest customers are very upset, if they feel that someone's kind of thumbed their nose at them, they're going to be radicalized, and I think they are radicalized now. I think they've given it a couple shots. They gave House Bill 589 a shot. They weighed in on the Green Source rider and said, this program absolutely doesn't work for us. This isn't what we signed up for. And what they sort of read in the paper was, well, this is a privilege for you to do this, not the will of the legislature. And I think that's not a successful business model for the 21st century for any of us. So those are three things. No way. Not a chance.
Great. And Sushma, I think you had more questions.
Yeah, a quick question to the business group, and that is, based on what Chris said, to what extent are the industrials and the business groups utilizing cleaner generation and storage options to reduce the cost and the operations of their business entities to reduce energy costs? And is that happening in a large scale or just experimental?
So if I understand your question correctly, and I'm going to speak from the perspective of my previous employer, which was Family Dollar, national retail chain. And while I was the energy manager there, we initiated a program to pursue clean energy, solar energy at our stores and distribution centers. And the places that we would pursue that were in states that allowed third-party sales. So even though that's a homegrown North Carolina business, we pretty much boxed out the entire state for pursuing any of that because it was just too difficult of a path for us. Moreover, the way that Wall Street valued our stock was based on the quantity of store growth and the number of renovations that we would do that would increase the sales lift in those renovated stores. So we wanted to dedicate our capital dollars to that. So having a third-party sales opportunity in states like Texas and California, and kind of up in the Northeast, Northeast, that's where we focus those efforts. So we would have pursued it here, but it just wasn't in the cards for us given the regulatory environment.
Great. Time for one more question.
So I had a question for you as well, just about the business community involvement in this. And I've seen this growing chasm between companies in the state that are customers that are increasingly becoming plugged into this conversation, and customers in this state that are in the energy field, particularly the larger energy companies, the multinationals, the ABBs, and I'm probably shouldn't call them out by name, but some of the larger players, which North Carolina has a lot of. If you really look around the country, North Carolina has one of the largest hubs of major companies doing research in the smart grid, writ large community. And a lot of those companies are not engaged in this conversation. And the ones that are sending people that are either in their, they're focused on local sales, or they're sending people that are focused around local facility management, rather than the folks that are, maybe contributors to some of the technical questions that we're trying to deal with here. So I guess the question I would have for you is, do you have any thoughts on how we get that energy community of companies more engaged in this conversation so that we can better tap into that kind of expertise?
So that's a tough question. So how to better tap into the technical energy service businesses within the state? I think that's probably as a question related to how I want to answer this. When in the presentation, we talked about kind of the development of the skilled workforce and the need for R&D to kind of stay in front and have those proactive types of policies and regulations that can enable our businesses to take advantage of clean energy economy benefits. And so I think if we played up that piece of it and how the innovation part can contribute to that business growth of that segment particularly, I think that would attract more people from that particular niche.
Yeah, and I hear, and this goes to the university side of the equation as well, but we really have three separate pieces of that conversation as well. There's kind of the facility energy management people that are basically just more large customers, and really, could largely fit into that large customer conversation with you guys. We've got the research guys that probably tie to this community that I was just alluding to. And then we've got the education side, which, tends to focus on, pieces of the puzzle, but parts like the community college system, which kind of sits somewhere between vocational education and STEM through 12 and, master's students and PhD students, doesn't get as much attention. So, I guess I'm fuzzing for my question here, but I guess the question is, how do we find ways to, the piece that's in the middle is the piece that's going to directly affect North Carolina implementation. And it seems like we're kind of missing that piece in the middle on a lot of these fronts. We have a lot of customers that have a demand, and we get that, and we have a lot of focus on kind of the high-end picture, but the people that could really help us answer the questions don't seem to be getting engaged in those two.
I have a quick thought, and the thought is who are the customer? Who's the customer for those smart grid companies you're talking about? By and large, the utility, right? So those customers will follow, or those businesses will follow their major customers. That's how they got here, right? And so, it could be DOD, but DOD isn't quite getting what it needs to do what it wants to do in decentralized power now, or it could be universities, but it's not them either. So the tone that's set by the utilities, I think, will be what engages or continues the disengagement of those companies.